Design inspiration, real-life makeovers, and the latest in pop culture. This is the Uploft Interior Design Podcast with Betsy Helmuth.
Am I the only one that's absolutely exhausted by summer? It's supposed to be like this amazing break, this respite, this sort of downtime, and instead it is so much more work as a parent because there are no buses. Other people are going on vacation. So my sitters, my support around the house is somewhat unreliable. I'm having to rely on backups. People are visiting more than they usually do. So I'm having to deal with getting the house ready with fewer helpers. Then my kids are erratically here and sometimes not here. They still have stuff at night. My daughter has a play tonight, Bye Bye Birdie. Has a play tomorrow. My son has had 2 baseball games consecutively, today and yesterday. My babysitter canceled last minute. My 2-year-old daughter went to a 2-hour play and did amazingly, but it took every little bit of my worry, concern. Oh my gosh. So I'm stressed out. I'm over here running around. My husband's gone next week for work. So I'm trying to figure out how I get my son to baseball training camp in a town next door while getting myself to New York City, while getting him home, while getting my daughter to theater, while getting her. Oh my God. Does this sound familiar, guys? Anyway, on top of all that, I'm trying to make a living and work with clients and run a business. And that is what is leading to me podcasting tonight at 11 p.m. Oh my God, I almost called it 11 a.m. That's how tired I am. And after I log off, I'm going to start a client project. And I have been taking a ton of client projects. So as you know, not only am I working with clients, we're training a new designer who is whip smart. She's been doing all of her homework. She has an architecture background and in fact teaches architecture at a university in Pennsylvania. But interior design is a whole nother animal. So she's always wanted to use her creative skills and she's learning this entirely new trade, if you will. But there is a learning curve and she has lots of amazing questions. So I figured I'd turn that training content into podcast content and share some of her questions with you. But before I do, let me just talk about a couple of client projects I'm working on. So I am currently working with this lady on the Upper West Side. And sometimes clients want to have an exploratory call with me ahead of time to make sure that I'm a good fit for their project, just like a chemistry call, because, we want to align. So I met with this lady. She lives on the Upper West Side, and she's like, I already know the layout of my living room and dining room. I already know that I only want vegan leather furniture, and it needs to be in a shade of cream or off-white. And that's what I want the entire room to be. And I don't have any questions and I'm not deviating. I was like, okay. So after kind of hearing that information and seeing absolutely no inspiration pictures, I say, well, why do you want help from a designer? If you already know the layout, you already know exactly what you're looking for, why am I needed? And she's like, well, I just don't have time to actually look for these pieces. I just, I'm telling you what I want and then you go find it. I have to say, it's not my favorite way to work. And she had more items on her list that needed to be sourced than came with her package. So normally you can add those on a la carte. They can just pay extra and have me add on additional items. For her, I said, I really don't think adding additional items is a good idea. You're so specific, you're so clear on what you want that I want to just start with these preliminary items, make sure I'm hitting it out of the ballpark for you, and then we can add those on once we know we're in alignment. No, I don't want that. I want you to get this all done for me right away. I can't wait any more time. Add them on. And so I said, okay, well, let's talk about these other items that are vegan leather that maybe need to be made of wood or whatever. Let's talk about those specifications because I knew there would be more specifications. So she says, well, I don't like stone, I don't like metal, and I don't like glass. I only like wood. And so I ask her, because I have a feeling there's a preference, I say, what shade of wood? And I say, your floors are really light, but the cabinets in the kitchen are more of a mid-tone. Oh, well, I don't want it to match the floors because if it doesn't perfectly match the floors, it's going to be more obvious. Let's match the cabinets, which I actually thought was a smart idea and made a lot of sense. But I feel like I have very little creative room. And the floor plan that she'd already decided upon, in my mind, didn't necessarily optimize for what she wanted to do in the space. So, of course, I always like to start with the floor plan and make sure we're on the same page. And in this case, there was no discussion. Okay. So I'm feeling particularly challenged in this $4 million apartment by the restrictiveness, but sometimes people being that restrictive and specific can actually lead to an amazing outcome because I know exactly what to look for. I don't have to spend a lot of time hemming and hawing, making creative choices. Should this be circular or rectangular? She already knows. She already told me. And her budget is very high. Like I'll be, even though for leather or vegan leather, it's not particularly high because just double the price of a sofa or an armchair if you want leather or even vegan leather. So anyway, that's what we're working with one of my clients. Another one of my clients I just finished today, he's like a very sweet man. He's probably, well, I don't know how old he is, but he's retired. And he was just riding a bike in New York City. Something happened with the bike. I can't exactly remember. Maybe he kind of caught something or something and it flipped over his handlebars, totally shattered his elbow and maybe something else. I can't recall. But anyway, he's really been going through it because he just moved into a new apartment. And so unpacking and getting settled in has just become nearly impossible. And he wanted me to focus on his patio because his friends had already designed his common areas and bedroom. Well, of course, I had things to say about the common areas in the bedroom. Anyway, you know how I do, people. So that was interesting, but he really, which I appreciated, was quite upfront with being like, just stay in your lane, just stay on the balcony. And so I did that. And then I have another client tomorrow. Let's see. Well, it's so funny. I'm working with two clients right now simultaneously who want sexy, scary spaces, like maybe blood, maybe organs, definitely skeletons, definitely open to bones or whatever, but they also want it to be very feminine, very sexy. And I wouldn't say that's like incredibly rare. Maybe it happens once a year. For it to be happening twice the same week is somewhat startling. Maybe there's something in the air. And one day I'll get into all the trends I'm seeing with these clients, but one thing that really bothers me. So people have been sending me as inspiration photos AI pictures, which does not intrinsically bother me. Like many pictures that you find online for inspo pics or pics of spaces in general are going to be generated by AI. I can almost tell right away. Sometimes I have to look a little bit closer, but I can almost always tell. Anyway, my client who wanted only the pleather and only wood kept generating photos on AI based on her specifications. So I would tell her, well, tell me, what you want the table to look like. And she'd put it into AI and it would spit out a picture. The thing about that was that she was able to find pictures she liked. The thing that's wrong about that is that none of those pieces actually exist in real life. There was like this chaise that wouldn't even physically stand up on its own if it were real. And so she's hoping or aspiring for these pieces that could never exist. And it's making my job extra challenging because either I educate her on the fact that I will not be able to find this piece that could not actually defy gravity. But then, she feels like I'm knocking her ideas. So it's this fine line. And normally I've been an AI fan. I use it every day in my firm, not for design selections because I find it is not good at that. Sometimes I'll type in very specific things I'm looking for and it does not generate helpful leads. But I use it a lot for complicated emails, for generating data, for doing quick math. I love using AI, but I am finding that it is causing some problems for my firm. All right, that's my recap of the week in clients. Now let's get the week in design training. So I'm training this amazing designer, Amy, and she asks the best questions and she prepares. She's the best student I've ever trained. And I'm just so grateful because I've got a lot going on right now and I need a little ease in my life. So she asked some really great questions. The first questions that she asked me this week were about budget. So she said, how do you stay within budget if a client changes one item? So if they say, Betsy, I really want the more expensive dining table, what do you do? Now, first of all, I don't always provide options for every piece. Only for pieces where I'm really conflicted, like I like them both, I just can't decide, or for pieces where I want to show them a splurge that's going to be outside their budget, but everything else fits inside their budget. So maybe they're willing to save, or maybe they can allocate some funds if they decide that that splurge is totally worth it for them. So if one item changes, sometimes then I will look to the next item that could have a possibility that's kind of expensive that I need to adjust. So for instance, if they went for the more expensive dining table, it immediately takes them outside of budget. First of all, I would have told them during the presentation that that's the splurge and that's what's going to happen. But second of all, I might compensate with a piece that I know I could find at a different price point. Dining chairs, I can find high-low options very quickly. And dining rugs, I can find high-low options very quickly. Probably also a chandelier above the dining table as well. So those would be quick swaps I might make, even though I do find light fixtures to sometimes be trickier than chairs or rugs. So then she says, what happens if I fall in love with something's over budget? Well, I already kind of shared that. I would provide it as an option, a second or third option that I just had to show them, but it's really going to take us outside of where we need to be. You know, just something I do. Then one of my clients the other day said, Betsy, I really want you to factor in installation and painting and labor, like the cost of assembling these pieces when you're calculating my total budget. And that is not happening. So that I just manage expectations because depending on where you live, depending on the quotes that you get, depending on which contractor you have chemistry with, I can't know what their quote is going to come in at. So I can't properly adjust for that. Instead, I just really stress, give me that budget for just furniture and I will hit it. And then she asked me, how much wiggle room should I leave in my budget with clients? I hardly leave any wiggle room. If they give me 12,000 and I want to spend 12,000, I will. Now, I just had a client the other day who said I have 27,000 and I didn't need to spend over 20. The only bit of wiggle room I will flag is that I don't calculate shipping and tax for their area. It fluctuates based on your address. So that's a piece where I might save a little cushion, especially if the budget is tight. But if my client gives me a range or I can tell that they have extra money, I'm just not going to worry about that shipping and tax because it's going to be relatively negligible. Now let's get into her furniture and layout questions. So she asked me, do all the wood tones in a room need to match? Well, first of all, as you guys know, if you've been longtime listeners, my philosophy is the architectural woods, the floors, the moldings, the doors do not have to match the furniture. As you heard my client reference in the first part of this episode, sometimes it can look overly matchy-matchy or just be too much of that same wood texture or color and look oppressive. So no, I do not normally tend to do that. That being said, all the furniture stays in the same family. So if I decided to go medium like those cabinets or light like the floors or dark, I would stick with all my pieces being light woods, medium woods, or dark woods in terms of furniture selections. Now, the next question was, how do designers decide what furniture sizes work in a room? And the answer to that is you create a floor plan. I always do a scale drawn floor plan. We happen to use Design Files as our floor plan software. I also love Icovia. Those are two very user-friendly, easy programs that also are kind of fun to work with, unlike SketchUp, Revit, AutoCAD, all of which I have tried and are absolutely no fun and more expensive. And once I plug it into the floor plan, then I make sure that I'm using standard size furniture. And of course, I have all those human proportions and measurements memorized in terms of how much space you need between the edge of a coffee table and the edge of a sofa, what a walkway should be, right? In terms of that number of inches. So then I'm applying those numbers that I have memorized around the room, making sure that in the spaces in between the furniture, I have the appropriate allotted space. Now, the next question was not a question she asked, but it was adjacent. What if a client really loves West Elm, say, and they just want everything from West Elm? Well, they called the wrong designer because I do not buy everything from the same store. First of all, not every store does everything right. So, for instance, I love West Elm's nightstands. I love their end tables in general. I love their armchairs, their accents, and some of their lamps. I hate, with a passion of 1,000 suns, all their sofas and sectionals. And I'm not a huge fan of their dressers. So I wouldn't be able to shop at just West Elm, even if my client had a very large gift certificate there, in good conscience. Instead, I like to shop at a range of stores and mix what I know these different stores do well. And yeah, instead I'm more cued into what the client's style is, what the color palette is, where I can find those items, and of course that budget. How do I make a small room functional without it feeling cramped? Well, I would go back to that floor planner. So it is just crucial. I put every single room that I work on in the floor plan software. It just tells the story. Now, I find that floor plan softwares can be a little bit deceptive in the fact that even if you have the spacing numbers right, you still want to imagine these items and humans moving in space. So if you have a recliner or a swivel glider, you want to give it space to recline and swivel glide without hitting the wall. If you're thinking of a desk chair, you want to make sure when you pull it out that you're not hitting a rug and causing it to bubble up, or hitting a wall and causing it to feel tight. So you need to give extra room. You never want to do less room. On a floor plan, it already looks more spacious than it will actually feel. So test your measurements and then allot a little more space than you think you need. You're never going to regret getting the slightly smaller sofa in a room where it was on the cusp. And then my next question that I thought was really good of her to ask, is it ever okay to have one nightstand? And the answer is yes, sometimes. Generally, no, it's not okay. So even if the person is single, if they're an adult, I will give them two nightstands. I love the balance. I love the idea of drawing a partner into this space. I just think for so many reasons, two nightstands is a gorgeous high-end look. If it's a child, anybody under the age of 21, one nightstand is totally fine. If it is somebody who wants to use the other side for, say, a desk or a dresser because the space is tight or compromised, for sure, because that can be sort of a nightstand-like surface that isn't exactly a nightstand. Yeah, those are pretty much the only circumstances. Or if I have a client who's maybe a nun, or maybe just very adamant that, Betsy, I don't want to. That's just not what I want. Or if I'm super space compromised. But even if I was super space compromised, I would probably do a storage headboard and move the bed out a little bit and not do any nightstands rather than just doing one. Guys, that's a lot of questions. I just answered a lot right there. You probably have design questions that you're asking yourself. I sure wish Betsy could design for me. I also want all cream pleather furniture. Well, all you have to do is head over to uploft.com/podcast. Once again, that's uploft.com/podcast. I'll pick out your pleather furniture. I'll train you to be a designer. You let me know what you're working on, and I have answers for you. Once again, uploft.com/podcast. I hope you're having a restful summer, and I'll see you again next week. Bye. A big thanks to our producer, Jeremy Young, and to Aton and the Embassy for our theme music. And shout out to our parent company, Uploft Interior Design, your trusted source for expert interior design. Visit uploft.com to explore our services and book a consultation with one of our talented designers. If you're enjoying the Uploft Interior Design Podcast, please support us by sharing the show with friends and leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. It's the best way to help new listeners find us. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week with more pro tips and pop culture dish.